Welcome back to talkSPORT USA with myself, Will Varney, continuing our series of team previews building up to the NFL draft getting underway in just 2 weeks' time. Today, we're going to turn our attention to the Kansas City Chiefs. They find themselves with 2 first-round picks. It's a situation they don't really often have, and therefore provides them with great draft capital to really find some impact players to really instill some real talent on this roster after what was an underwhelming season last campaign. Pleasure to say, joining me here, good friend on the channel, it's our Chiefs reporter for The Athletic, Jesse Newell. Jesse, how are you?
Doing great, Will. How about yourself?
Very well, thank you. The last time we spoke was just towards the end of the season, and reflecting on what, like I mentioned there, an underwhelming campaign, just 6 wins for the Chiefs, something they really haven't been used to in years gone by or in recent years. I wanted to start by just briefly reflecting on free agency, because often before we get into the draft, free agency is how we often see rosters start to take shape and maybe how plans and approaches are made for the draft. From the business that the Chiefs did in free agency, how do you think that shaped the approach ahead of the draft for the Chiefs?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. They weren't super active, and I think that lets you know in a salary cap league, when you get up against it and you give a bunch of your players extensions, there comes a certain point where you can't do anymore or you're losing some flexibility for the future. So we didn't see the Chiefs super aggressive there, but we did see them. What Brett Veach, the general manager for the Chiefs, likes to do is he likes to cover his base needs in free agency so he can go into the draft with a free mind. So he doesn't have to go out and get a running back or doesn't have to go out and get a defensive tackle with his first round pick. He can kind of let the board play to him and let things in front of him happen, and then he can adjust to that. So the two big ones to me are Kenneth Walker, running back, and the Chiefs. They spent up for Kenneth Walker. They gave him one of the richest free agent contracts for running back in NFL history. But once again, this is a draft that's not very thick at running back. So instead of having Jeremiah Love, everybody's mocking him as a top 10 pick. Instead of going to the draft saying we have to have Jeremiah Love, the Chiefs just said, let's take some free agent dollars. Let's take the top running back available and let's cover that need so that you can go into the draft. You don't have to worry about that specific need. You can feel like that's basically covered. And then the second one that people will know about is Travis Kelce coming back for another year, the tight end for the Chiefs. It's basically a 1-year deal in practicality, but for him coming back, it's going to be a big deal, not only for, the Chiefs and the leadership he brings and the production he brings, but for the whole NFL, because he's about to get married, the Taylor Swift thing, everything. He's the biggest celebrity that the NFL has. So him coming back for another year will obviously be something a lot of people will be paying attention to.
I just wanted to quickly, before we get stuck into the draft, touch on what you just said there about Travis Kelce, because I know that you wrote an article for The Athletic. There was this reporting that it's a 3-year deal, but essentially, like you just said there, it is a 1-year contract. So just talk us through, does it feel like this is definitely going to be the finale for Travis Kelce this year, or is there still that option open in terms of what could happen the next couple of years?
Yeah, I would say the option's open. There's kind of a term they call for it here is the poison pill, because what happens is these agents go out there and they want to have these numbers look astronomical and say, oh my gosh, I got my guy Travis Kelce, a 3-year, $65 million deal. When in actuality, if that was going to happen, he was going to get a $40 million bonus basically on June 5th of next year. And they'll never get to June 5th. They will get to June 1st and say either we're renegotiating a contract or you're retiring. So it is just one of those ways to kind of make the contracts look a lot bigger. But I would not say he's totally done. I would say it depends on this season and how it goes for the Chiefs and how his body feels. But the age of the NFL player, this is a young league. So for Travis Kelce to be 36, going to be 37 this season, how productive can he be? How does his body feel? How does his body hold up? All those will be major questions. And that's the biggest reason he's coming back this year is last year he was still pretty productive. Last year he didn't get injured. Last year he came into training camp in really good shape. So if all those things check the boxes, sure, he could be back for another season, but I do think there is some sort of reality hitting here that can he be as productive as he once was? Probably not. And if he can't, then when is the right time to walk away? He'll at least give it another run to see if he can go to the playoffs with Patrick Mahomes and make another run.
I was just going to ask quickly as well, is the expectation that he'll be still the starting tight end, or will we see a greater emergence of Noah Gray in this offense, depending on, like you say, the age of Travis Kelce right now? How do you think that room shapes out?
Yeah, Travis is still definitely the starter. He's not the blocker he once was. He's obviously doesn't have the speed that he once did. But honestly, Noah Gray had a tough year last year as well. He was one that in the offseason people thought maybe potentially the Chiefs might cut him just to free up some salary cap room. But they love what he does. Again, not a super productive year for him. The thing will be to watch is the draft. This is a pretty good tight end draft. And I know, some craziness out there. I was doing a mock draft for the Chiefs here a couple days ago. And for their 29th pick, Kenyon Sadiq, who was the top tight end available out of Oregon, was still available. So, could the Chiefs pass up a tight end potential Travis Kelce heir if he was available at the 29th pick? I don't know. I don't know that question because at some point everybody has to face reality that this thing can't go on forever, and Travis Kelce is going to go on to his married life, his celebrity life, his TV life, all after this pretty soon. So it'll be interesting to watch the Chiefs in the draft though because it's possible the Chiefs could draft a tight end there and potentially one they could see fitting in for Travis Kelce once he's no longer in Kansas City.
So let's get stuck into the draft then, because like I mentioned, 9 picks, but 2 in the first round, and it presents a huge opportunity, doesn't it, for the Chiefs that they don't commonly get because of the success that they've had in recent years to really bring in some impact players immediately, especially in the first round after that trade with the Rams with Trent McDuffie. Just talk to me then about picking in the top 10 first. That 9th overall pick, they haven't picked in the top 10 since I think 2017 when they took Mahomes. So in that situation, when you're picking in the top 10, is this one where they have to focus on positional value rather than maybe need if they're picking so high up?
Yeah, you hit on the high bar right there. The last top 10 pick, Patrick Mahomes, that one turned out pretty well. And the Chiefs had to trade the next year's first round pick to get that pick when they traded with the Buffalo Bills. So this is not a luxury they normally have. I will caveat this with I think any of the draft analysts you have out there that are looking at this draft, this is not a very strong draft at the top. So that top tier, usually you go and get those guys, a top 10 pick, you're going, hey, we looked at his film. There's not many holes here. We love this guy. This guy should be top of the league. And this year it's a lot of like, well, we like him, but his arm length is short. Or we like him, but he's not super physical. Or we like him, but he doesn't really fit the sort of profile we normally see from a player like this. So I think it's a little unfortunate for the Chiefs. It's funny, you go back in time with them, and the last number 1 overall pick they had was a super weak draft back in the early 2010s when they ended up taking Eric Fisher. So they seem to kind of time this wrong usually. They get these top 10 picks when, or they've earned these top 10 picks when the draft isn't as strong. So in the NFL, I would say more than like positional need, it's premium position. And what I mean by that is when you open up free agency, certain position groups get paid way more than other ones. And the rookie contracts are on a very tight scale. So like the Chiefs number 9 pick, we already know is going to get a 4-year deal for $31 million. Okay. I just told you the Chiefs went out and got Kenneth Walker as a running back. They paid him about 2 years or 3 years and $40 million. So like a top level running back costs you 3 years and $40 million. If you go out and get an edge rusher, those top end guys get 7 years, $180 million. Or a top left tackle gets that sort of thing. So for the Chiefs, what they have to weigh here is that when they go in free agency and only have certain limited dollars to spend, you can't go get an edge rusher. You can't go get potentially a wide receiver. You can't go get a defensive tackle. Those guys aren't available for less than $100 million. But now in the draft, for 4 years and $31 million, you could potentially get a defensive tackle that'll start for you for 4 years, or an edge rusher who could make so much surplus value that it helps out the rest of your roster. So the Chiefs have needs in a lot of spots. They have needs like safety. They still have needs at, I talked about tight end. They don't normally get paid as much, but I think the main concern or the main thing that'll be top of mind is what positions can they not get in free agency very cheap? And can you draft those positions? Which leaves them in a little bit of a bind because if a bunch of edge rushers and a bunch of receivers go off the board early and a bunch of offensive tackles are left, they don't necessarily need another one of those guys. They could. They don't normally do this under Brett Veach, the GM, but they could look to trade back in the first round. That is if anybody else wants to trade up because the word is out there. This is a little bit of a drowned draft. So if the Chiefs sort of get left in a pickle there, if a bunch of receivers, a bunch of edge rushers go off the board and nobody wants to trade up, it will be very interesting to see what they do with that particular pick.
And like you say, it's almost uncommon that you see those premium positions even hitting free agency alone, teams looking to tie them up in contracts. So like you say, it's probably going to be the focus of edge and wide receiver. It feels like maybe with those 2 first-round picks. what do you think they're going to do with the ninth overall pick? Do you think they would prioritize edge, even though it's a deeper edge class, just because of the quality at the top of the draft maybe is better than, say, the quality if they were to leave it to the 29th overall pick and take an edge there? What do you think they'll do? How will it shape out?
Yeah, we can talk about this in so many ways because you're talking about two like tiers of guys, and edge rusher is actually very deep this year, and receiver is very deep. So the Chiefs sort of have options here because if they don't get one of those positions at number 9, they still have number 29 and number 40, where they potentially could get one of those guys in the second tier where they say, we still feel pretty good about this player, and we feel like this point in the draft, we're getting a guy who might be a first-round pick in other years. It's just there's so many receivers this year, he gets pushed down a little bit. So, yeah, I would anticipate edge rusher or receiver. A lot of the mocks, I have to do a mock, it feels like, every other day or so. But a lot of the mocks, I have the Chiefs taking either Carnell Tate, who's one of the top receivers out of Ohio State. Makai Lemon is more out of USC. He's more of a smaller receiver, but super quarterback friendly. Well, we got to mention here, Patrick Mahomes is coming off a season-ending knee injury. So anything to make his life easier where he doesn't have to scramble all the time, that will be helpful for the Chiefs. You could look at Jordan Tyson, who has slipped a little bit because of injury concerns. He's a wide receiver out of Arizona State, but he's been moving up a little bit in the consensus boards that I've been seeing. Again, he has all the tools. It's just a matter of staying healthy. He's battled injuries for most of his Arizona State career. But I would say the number one guy I've been mocking to the Chiefs has been Miami edge rusher Ruben Bain Jr. And again, we talk about these caveats when it comes to these players. Super productive in college. Super disruptive, high motor, high intelligence. A guy that said that he killed his Chiefs interview when we talked to him at the Combine in Indianapolis a couple months ago. The Chiefs normally tend toward these versatile, high intelligence players. His big knock is his arm length. He's going to have historically short arm length when it comes to the NFL, and usually guys can work around that if you have the tools. It seems like Ruben Bain does, but there are certain times where that is a limitation. You have to figure out a way around that because if offensive tackles can lock onto you and get a hold of you, then you can be done for in that particular rep. So that's the number one guy, I think, for the Chiefs, though. If that guy ends up slipping, I think they have to seriously consider him there at number 9. But will he slip to number 9? I've seen some mock drafts going as high as 2 for Ruben Bain Jr. So that's where we talked about with Brett Veach, being able to be flexible in the draft and kind of adjust to the board however it falls to you. But like I said, if a bunch of those receivers and then Ruben Bain Jr. go off the board, and David Bailey's another one from Texas Tech, that's Patrick Mahomes' alma mater. You always have to watch out for those Texas Tech guys. But if those guys are all off the board with that number 9 pick, I'm going to be very interested to see what the Chiefs do because they'll be in a little bit of a pickle.
Just on the wide receiver position, it feels like it is a need for this team, and consistently we talk about surrounding Patrick Mahomes with quality, and especially coming off the ACL injury as well, he's going to need that safety net. I just wonder if there's a prototype of a wide receiver that you think the Chiefs really need, because obviously you say the difference between, say, Makai Lemon and his build to Jordan Tyson, when that room shapes up with Rashee Rice and they re-sign Tyquan Thornton, you have Xavier Worthy as well. What type of receiver do you think will be beneficial?
That's a great question, and I struggle with that answer. We're going to ask Brett Veach that here in a week when he talks to reporters. The Chiefs tend, Andy Reid and Brett Veach, their type is short, fast guys. Like it always has been. Like they traded up for Xavier Worthy. They went out and got Tyquan Thornton when he's available, and there was some rumblings that the Chiefs were interested in the 2022 draft. If you go back and look at that draft, the Chiefs took Sky Moore a few picks after Tyquan Thornton when the Patriots traded up to get Tyquan Thornton. So it makes you wonder if they go back in time, if Tyquan Thornton was available, if that was going to be the Chiefs pick in the second round that particular year. So Tyquan Thornton's a little bit taller, but they tend towards fast guys. The question becomes, last year, their deficiencies, a little bit in the red zone and a lot with contested catches and also beating man coverage. Could they use some diversity? Our athletic podcast does a great job, the NFL, the athletic football podcast. Robert Mays looks at the whole NFL, and they have just been preaching for months, like, the Chiefs need some diversity. They need a true outside receiver, tall guy, can beat man coverage, can beat you down the field. That would diversify what they have and help out the team in a variety of different ways instead of giving them the same thing that they've already had. So I'm a little bit torn here because I feel like when the Chiefs see a guy and they target him and he's fast and he's small and he moves in space and like they love him, it feels like they get the most out of him. But there's also the part of me that says, if you put a tall, true outside receiver like Carnell Tate who can separate and beat man coverage and give that to the Chiefs and diversify what they have and allow the other pieces to play up, potentially that might be exactly what they need with this particular offense. So I can go both ways on it. I think it's a really good question, Will, that you asked there, but I would say they could take either, and it depends on so much on their scouting because those three receivers I just mentioned, I think Most people would consensus say like most drafts they'd be top 20-ish, top 25-ish, but maybe in this kind of weak draft they would go top 10. So you have to be very secure about how you feel about these guys. And the Chiefs they love to rely on their scouts and the eyes that they have on these particular players. So I think it'll be a scouting call here, and the Chiefs have to go with the guy they feel best about.
I've also got to ask you about another position right now, and in terms of needs, feels like cornerback is really interesting right now. Trent McDuffie is traded, Jalen Watson has also left, and we know that the mantra of this defensive staff is to get the best out of their cornerbacks, even if they're not going to take them particularly high up in the draft. Whereabouts do you feel like they prioritize that position in terms of whether it's going to be maybe day 2, day 3, for example?
Yeah, so I want to say this real quick. So at the annual meetings last week in Phoenix, Brett Veach talked to Peter Schrager of ESPN and had an interview with him. And the great thing about Brett Veach is when you talk to him in an interview, he basically tells you the truth. I mean, a lot of guys will be a little bit shady, dodgy with it. Brett Veach usually kind of lets you know what he's thinking. And so he was asked about his first round pick, his number 9 overall pick, and where he might go with it. And he said, well, I feel like I'm wide open to it, whether it's a receiver, an edge rusher, or a cornerback. Okay, so notice the positions he didn't mention. He didn't say tackle. He didn't say defensive tackle. He didn't say offensive lineman, but he did say cornerback. And so the Chiefs are in a weird position here. I just mentioned sort of the horrible scenario for them, which is if all these receivers, or a bunch of them, or the receivers they like, and all the edge rushers go early, and nobody wants to trade up. So who do you take? Well, Mansour Delane is one of those guys at number 9 who has been mocked by most people as a top 10 pick out of LSU. And so could the Chiefs take him at number 9 if all those things fall wrong and you say, hey, look, it's a position of need, it's a premium position, all those other guys went before, we can't trade down. Can you take that guy? I think you can. Now you get down to 29 for the Chiefs. A very interesting prospect down there that could be available is a guy named Avion Terrell, who out of Clemson, who has been mocked around that area. Usually kind of been in the upper 20s, but has been kind of falling to the lower 20s in some of these mocks I've seen. What's so interesting is he got asked at the combine who he models his game after, and he says Trent McDuffie. So this is the guy who has all the mental tools, sticks to receivers, all that stuff, but not the perfect size. So basically, you're describing Trent McDuffie light. And again, if you're trying to replace Trent McDuffie, doing that with the 29th pick this particular year could happen. But again, to your original point, Will, the Chiefs have Steve Spagnuolo, who's a longtime cornerbacks coach, and then they have Dave Merritt, their defensive backs coach. They have done so well taking guys in the mid rounds, taking guys in the late rounds like Jalen Watson, and developing them in their room and making them become, starting cornerbacks in the NFL. Even Trent McDuffie, taking him in the first round and developing him into an all-pro. They do so well at this that it feels kind of weird to take first-round picks because you feel like maybe with a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick or a fifth-round pick, you can get a similar level of production because of how they teach these guys so well. So I'm not answering your question, but again, this is how the draft goes. So much is determined on what the teams before you do. So will the Chiefs take a cornerback at number 9? I don't think so, but they could. Will they take one at 29? I don't think so, but they could. More likely, though, is what you're talking about, which is they could target somebody in those 3rd to 4th rounds that they feel like can play up in their system, and they feel like they can develop under their own umbrella. And they've done that so often in the past, I would not bet against them doing it again.
I just wanted to put a scenario out there. I know that you said Brett Veach speaks very honestly, mentioned those 3 positions. I just wanted to get your thoughts on if, like you say, the edge position isn't falling their way, wide receiver potentially, and then maybe they're questioning the value of taking a cornerback at, say, 9th overall. If there's a situation where, say, Francis Mauigoa or Spencer Farnu falls to 9, obviously Jalen Moore has 1 year left on his deal, expected he's going to be the starting right tackle. I just wonder, could they potentially, even though it's not the sexy pick, could they potentially look at one of those offensive linemen and go, I tell you what, we need to improve protection of Patrick Mahomes, and maybe you take one of those guys to be the right tackle for the future moving forward? Could you see it?
I can't. Now, you're talking to a guy in his first mock draft who had this exact scenario play out, and Mauigoa was there, and I said, if it was me, I'm taking Mauigoa for the Chiefs because the vision in my head was the vision that you had, Will, which is just saying, hey, they could protect Mahomes from left to right and feel great about it for the foreseeable future. Having conversations since then and talking to people, you have to look at, so much of what went wrong with the Chiefs last year when it came to the offensive line was so many injuries. They were down to their 6th tackle, their 7th tackle. Can't anticipate that's going to happen every single year. But if you go from left to right for the Chiefs, left tackle, This is the investment they've already made in protecting Patrick Mahomes. Left tackle is a first-round pick. Left guard is a second-round pick they traded up for. Center is the highest paid center in the NFL until this year when Tyler Linderbaum went over and got surpassed him.
Yeah.
Right guard is Trey Smith, the highest paid right guard ever in history when he signed his contract extension. And then Jalen Moore, who's actually top 10 when it comes to cap charge against a team when it comes to right tackle. So I hear you. Like next year, what do they want to do? How do they feel like they can fill it in? The one big question, and I wrote about that in a story today at The Athletic, is if they take a tackle in the draft, I think it lets us know how they feel about Esa Pole, who played a little bit late in the year as a fill-in substitution because he was an undrafted rookie, super raw, came to football late. But if they feel good about him, potentially you have him as a backup this year and can fill in next year in that right tackle spot. But the bottom line with me and kind of talking through this is they've already invested a whole lot in that offensive line to finally get a top 10 pick and then invest again in it. I mean, there's a certain point where you can say, hey, there's a way to fill in one spot that you need help with and find a way to get it covered when the other four spots you should just feel amazing about. And we're talking about Josh Simmons when he's in there. He's going to make a lot of money one day if he stays on the field, is as productive as he was. Kingsley had a great year. Creed and Trey Smith are considered some of the tops at their position in the NFL. So I totally hear you on that. And again, my first mock, I had the same thought, like, what if they could just secure their offensive line for the foreseeable future? But again, more conversations, more talk about it, more kind of evaluating what they have. I don't see that as a scenario. I see them desperately trying to trade out of that pick if that happens. But I think if push comes to shove in that scenario, the Chiefs will be looking at another position.
Final couple of questions from me, Jesse. I wanted to ask about the current recovery time for Patrick Mahomes, obviously suffering that ACL injury. I just wondered, from your conversations with the organization at the owners meeting in the last couple of weeks as well, what does it feel like the trajectory is for his return? And does the signing of Justin Fields potentially mean you don't have to rush him back per se, and he maybe aggravates that injury if they're trying to rush him back for week one?
Yeah, so I love talking to Andy Reid, the Chiefs coach, at the annual meetings last week because he gives a little bit different perspective on Patrick Mahomes because Andy had knee reconstructive surgery in the offseason. So when he talks about, hey, Patrick is hitting this thing hard, I see him in there all the time, he's saying that because sitting on the training table next to Patrick Mahomes is Andy Reid getting his knee rehab done. So he kind of joked that Julie Freimeyer, who's in charge of Patrick's recovery, the athletic trainer in the office, says that she warms up on Patrick and then she takes it out on Andy on his knee afterwards. So it is funny to kind of think about those two guys. And, not that Patrick Mahomes needs motivation, but if your coach was sitting right next to you, I might be motivated to get in an extra rep or two just to let him know that I was working pretty hard. But, Patrick said in January his goal is to make it back for week one. As of right now, it seems like everything in the trajectory is trending toward that he will be back week one. He's sort of a freak when it comes to recovery, rehab. I mean, a few years back, he got injured on a quarterback sneak. His kneecap was on the side of his knee. He came back to the team in 2 weeks. Had high ankle sprain, and then had one, was playing in the Super Bowl a couple years back and had one of the longest quarterback runs in NFL history. I mean, this guy just is different when it comes to pain tolerance, rehab, that sort of thing. Will, to your point, what they have to be worried about is a setback. Like, there is a potential as you're training, as you're doing this, as you're getting yourself ready, something happens unforeseen. And if that happens, the Chiefs feel better about having Justin Fields back there because he started NFL games. They feel like, with the experience he's going to get, these offseason program, he's going to take all the reps with the first team offense in this offseason because Patrick Mahomes won't be able to do it. He won't be out there practicing yet. So they feel better about that position because he's there and that because of the experience he has. But I would tell you that their anticipation, Patrick's anticipation, the team's anticipation is that he's going to be back for week one. Will he be 100% healthy? Probably not. Will he be favoring it a little bit? Probably so. But that's how he's wired. That's what his mindset is. And if anybody's going to beat a timeline for an injury, it's going to be that guy.
When we last spoke, we spoke about the importance of explosive plays moving forward for this Chiefs offense. And obviously you bring in Kenneth Walker, who is a Super Bowl MVP, and you expect him to hit the ground running essentially when he comes into this offense. But I wanted to ask you, the return of Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator, his experience with the Bears last year as the running backs coach, if anything, is his signing potentially more important in terms of the gravitas of bringing those explosive plays than maybe bringing in Kenneth Walker?
That's a good question. So I would still lean towards Kenneth Walker because that's his specialty. Okay. It's crazy because, the Chiefs, we talked so much about this, but they had 3 20-plus yard runs last year One was by their quarterback, and one was by receiver Xavier Worthy. So they had one running back who had a 20-plus yard run. And you look at Kenneth Walker, it's just what he does. He had more than that in the playoffs. He had as many of those in the Super Bowl as the Chiefs had all season from their running backs. So he's going to bring that. It's interesting with Eric Bieniemy because of his history with the Chiefs. I'm probably not going to communicate this in the correct way, but I'll try a little bit. Eric Bieniemy, when you go to training camp, you hear him. Like if you're visiting and you're watching it, he's yelling at the running backs to finish across the goal line, even though they're 50 yards away. He's just constantly finish. He's screaming at us. He's not afraid to get in your face. He's not afraid to challenge you. And we all have different personalities in this world. Like I'm not super confrontational person. We know people that are super confrontational people. But I think for the Chiefs, if you're looking at their offense and what Andy Reid provides, and we know he is the offensive coordinator. He is the architect. He creates plays. He calls the plays, on the field. And the offensive coordinator, it's always kind of like a sidekick. They relay the call to the quarterback. They help with the game plan. They talk to the team, all that sort. But I think over the course of a couple years, when Eric Bieniemy left, there just was something missing in the locker room. There just was something that the standard, you feel good about winning 2 Super Bowls and you make it to the next one, you feel good about yourself. And in the building, it just slips a little bit. Maybe this guy shows up a minute late to the meeting, but that's not a big deal. And then the next day he shows up 2 minutes late to the meeting. Well, okay, well, we let him go on this one, and now this one is like this. I think just it's natural, again, especially when you're 6-11, you evaluate all these things. I think it's natural to feel like the Chiefs just didn't have that edge last year. They weren't right with the details. They didn't get those small things that have always pushed them over the top when they've won Super Bowls. That pushed them to the bottom when they went 6-11. So I think the vision of bringing Eric Bieniemy in here more than anything else is to bring that fire back to the facility and make sure that standard, if it went from here to here last year, it comes back to here. And nobody is going to be below the standard because Eric Bieniemy will call you out if that happens. So I think that's going to be his biggest thing in the office. And it's funny because even a guy like Patrick Mahomes, we saw him a couple years ago on the field, like get in Eric Bieniemy's face. Those guys screaming at each other as they're going to the locker room. And he's one of the guys that is the most excited to bring back Eric Bieniemy because I think he started to see, like, if you see the standard slip a little bit, Patrick holds himself to this standard. He wants the others to come back up to here with him, and he knows Eric Bieniemy might be the best way to get all those guys back there. So I think that's the thing I'm going to be looking for from Eric Bieniemy is that sort of tough love that the team was probably missing last year when they had a down season and probably needs more of that discipline part of it. And I think from talking to some folks around, I think that's the thing that potentially you can see that'll make the difference in the details when we know NFL games are so close that one play can put you over the edge. They're hoping Eric Bieniemy can get them there.
Yeah, exactly. It can always be the finest margins. And like you say, there was some skepticism around Eric Bieniemy coming back. There were thoughts that maybe an influx of new ideas into that offensive room could actually be beneficial. But like when you see the reaction from the players to him coming back into this locker room, that's exactly what you want and say could be that, like I say, that spurs them on just to get them over the line. Final question from me, Jesse, that I've mentioned this to every guest that we've spoken to for these team previews, that the draft always gives you such a huge opportunity, none bigger really than for the Chiefs, that the fact that they've got 2 first-round picks. It can often, whether it shapes the future of a franchise or it might even just be for shaping a season essentially and their hopes. But how important and how much is at stake for the Chiefs when it comes to the draft in Pittsburgh in 2 weeks' time?
Yeah. So the thing that shaped the Chiefs going to 3 straight Super Bowls was the 2022 draft. They traded away Tyreek Hill, and then they hit on their draft picks. George Karlaftis, Trent McDuffie, Leo Chanel, Brian Cook, Jalen Watson. I mean, you just go down the line. They hit on all those picks. That foundation, along with Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones and Travis Kelce, that set the path for them to be able to go to 3 straight Super Bowls. This year, they have more draft capital than they did in that particular year. So this is, if 2022 was the most important draft that Brett Veach had, 2026 now becomes the most important draft he's had. And so we just talked about it. There's certain pockets of depth in the draft. There's certain places you feel like it's pretty good at receiver or edge rusher. You can get a pretty good guy there. Overall, the talent is down, but that doesn't mean you can't get these picks right. You got to find the right players. And so for the Chiefs to have this much draft capital, for them to get back to where they want to be, and for them to have this thing sustain over the long term with Patrick Mahomes coming back from his knee injury, they've got to nail this draft. They got to nail it like they did in 2022. And again, if they get it right, you see the potential reward. 3 straight Super Bowls is something that not many teams do. So if the Chiefs can do that sort of thing again this year with the picks that they do have, then I could see them once again atop the AFC and challenging for the Super Bowl once again. But they need some cheap, cost-controlled players at certain positions. They need to land and get those right guys and have them contribute immediately and over the next 4 years. And so that's why this one's so vital, and it's the most important one they've had since 2022 for sure.
Looking forward to seeing how it all shapes out in just a couple of weeks' time, what picks are made, what moves are made as well. Jesse Newell, Chiefs reporter for The Athletic, thank you so much for joining us here on talkSPORT USA.
Sounds good, Will.